Welcome to Kia e-Niro Diaries, coming to you from a place where nothing much really happens. Although yesterday next door's pet sheep, escaped and were running around in the lane outside, which is very exciting. But anyway, on to more electric vehicle things. For those of you who've watched my videos before, you know that I'm trying to record the experience of what I hope will be long-term ownership of a Kia e-Niro, but I also am someone who takes an interest in the electric vehicle market. I like to play with numbers. That's always been my job, doing business cases and things like this. And so really to talk about what's happening in the market. And in my last video, I talked about the 1% factor and why this was important. In terms of how things grow when a new technology starts off. So, we go back again to when colour televisions first came out. It took sort of a certain amount of time before, somebody knew someone who had a colour television, not a black and white one. And then there was this slowing down of the sales of black and white TVs. We call that the Osborne effect. And then all of a sudden, the sales of the new thing take off. And it's called this S-curve, and if you go back you can find lots of examples of when a new technology comes in, like for example when the iPod first came out and when the smartphone first came out. The sales of the old thing slow down very rapidly, and in fact total sales fall, and then all of a sudden everybody wants the new thing. Now the shape of the curve is always the same. It's this sort of gradual kind of slope up from the launch of the product to 1%, and then it takes off, and it takes a period of time before we get to mass adoption, which mass adoption marketing people typically talk about 80 to 90% is mass adoption. So when are we going to see that with electric vehicles? Well, it's kind of difficult to work it out unless you have hindsight. All these curves of iPods and colour televisions and smartphones are all driven with they're all drawn rather with the benefit of hindsight. And we don't have that. We are in the very early days still of electric vehicle take-up. But we have to make a starting point. So if we said that the starting point was 2010, when the Nissan Leaf, which was the first sort of practical, reasonable size electric vehicle to come out, it came out in Japan. So a few people in Japan, and Robert Llewellyn bought one. Yeah, he got one of the imports, and he talks about that on the Fully Charged show. I think he's still got this Nissan Leaf, which is, I guess, 10 years old now. So if we say that was a starting point, and there were other significant spots along the way, like the Model S coming out, Tesla Model S coming out in 2012. And so if we said 2010 was the starting point when electric vehicles first started to be sold, very few people were buying them. And we're 10 years on from that now. And there are probably about 6 or 7 million electric vehicles on the roads now of the world. Now, that sounds great, but actually in context it's still tiny, because what they call light-duty vehicles, which is, cars and vans, the kind of thing that private citizens buy, there are about 1.4 to 1.5 billion of those on the world's roads. So it's an awful lot of internal combustion, fossil fuel engine noise and heat and waste going on. It's going to take us a long time to churn all that out. But actually 1% of that, if we said 1% of that is 14 to 15 million, when are we going to get there? Well, based on the current increase in EV sales, I would expect we're going to get to 1% of all vehicles on the world's roads being electrified, that's battery electric and plug-in hybrids, by about the second half of 2021. So, a year, 18 months away. And this is accelerating fast. Now, the typical sort of rule of thumb with all previous technology introductions is that it takes as long to get from launch of the product to 1% of the people having them as it takes to get from 1% to mass adoption, so 80 to 90%. So if we say that in 2021 we're going to get to 1%, that would have taken 11 years. Okay, so if we add then 11 years on to 2021, we get to 2032 and we find that 80 to 90% of all new car sales are electric. And that seems quite reasonable to me, the way things are changing. Not just in the general kind of take-up, the number of models becoming available, but of course, technology is not going to stand still between now and 2032. We're going to see lithium-ion batteries getting cheaper, denser, lighter, and possibly new battery chemistries coming along, who knows. But anyway, we're into February now. It's mid-February, a beautiful sunny day here in the Poitou-Charentes, and I know that in the UK it's been a horrendous weekend with more wind and floods and stuff, and it's not looked great on the TV, so we're very lucky here with the weather. But the sales figures for January this year are starting to come out, and Europe has got off to an incredible start. So in France, I've written all this down because there's lots of information around. In France, EVs have in January 2020 were 11% of total new car sales. Well, it was only like 3 or 4% this time last year. And fossil fuel sales as a whole have crashed 25%. So the whole market's down, but EVs are up, and 15,000 cars with a plug were sold in France just in January. And that was 78%, 22% in favour of battery electric vehicles over plug-in hybrids. Now that's an incredible increase. And in Germany, which has never been sort of that keen on electric cars, but it is the biggest market in Europe, the total market was down 7.3%, but they still sold just over 16,000 electric vehicles. It was 54 to 46% in favour of plug-in hybrids. But, battery electric vehicles are up 61% on January 2019, and plug-in hybrids over 300%. So it's clearly something's happening even in fossil fuel engine addicted Germany. Then in the UK, sales of electric vehicles are up 145% on January 2019. There was again a 7.3% drop in the total market, and so plug-ins were 5.9% of all new sales last month, which is quite an improvement from the previous year. And sales were 50-50 roughly between battery electric and plug-in hybrids. Netherlands is the same. The market shrunk by 6%. EVs grew to 7.2% of the market. Italy, which is a very reluctant electric vehicle buyer, has gone booming. They've sold nearly 2,000 battery electric vehicles, and again the market was down. There was a 23% drop in diesel sales in Italy between January 2019 and January 2020. So it's really moving fast, and in terms of reaching this 1% point, this magical 1% point at which things really start to take off, France is almost there. There are 32 million light-duty vehicles on the roads in France, and if the sales continue at anything like the pace they have started the year with in January, then we're easily going to see 320, 350,000 electric vehicles on the road in France. I think there's already about 200 to 250, somewhere around that. So there are markets, obviously Norway surpassed the 1% a long time ago, and that's very rapidly gone to a greater than 50% of all new sales being electric. So it's great. But, I made a bit of a forecast to myself last year that this year we'd see 750,000 electric car sales in Europe, but I think it's going to be more like 1 million the way things are going. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for now. If you enjoy watching these, please please tick a like, because apparently that helps my videos get to more people. I don't know why. I don't understand YouTube at all. Don't know how to do it. Don't know. Not interested in doing adverts and stuff like that. There are some very, very good YouTubers out there. I've mentioned one before. It's called Just Have a Think. It's an environmental and technology website run by a really well researched guy in the UK. So please do check him out. Just have a think. And if you have been, thank you for watching.